Today we're going to be learning Shekalim Daf Chet, Moadim L'Simcha to everybody. Today's daf is sponsored by Barbara Ashkenaz in honor of her wonderful husband Ron, whose warm support of my learning daf Yomi spirited me to keep learning. I thank him with my full heart. And we're going to dedicate our learning today in memory of Rav Ronen Norwood, who passed away over Shabbat. A very big loss for our community and for the Jewish people. Okay, we're going to start now with, I'm going to go back to the Mishnah from the bottom of Zayin Amud Bet. This is a very central Mishnah. We're going to start now to talk about what happens with the money once it gets there. So they take it 3 times a year. They're going to collect all the money. In the next Mishnah later on today, we're going to see what exactly they put the money into. But they would do it 3 times a year. So we saw this 3-way machloket. I'll go into a little bit more of the details now today. Frosa Pesach, Prosa Tzeret, Prosa Chag. According to the first opinion, it's 15 days before Pesach, and it's 15 days before each holiday, basically. Behem Granot Shel Maaser Behema. It was the same time they did the Maaser Behema. I want to talk for a minute about the Maaser Behema, and I think correct something I might have said. I don't recall if I exactly said this, but Maaser Behema is a little bit different from the Maaser of the fruits. Fruits and vegetables can't be eaten until you tithe the produce. When it comes to animals, you can actually use your animals. You can slaughter your animals even before you tithe them. Okay, the way you would tithe them was you would put them into this big pen, and then you would walk them out one by one. Where do we see this from? Unitana Tokef in our Yom Kippur davening. We say we are like the sheep. Ma'avir tsono tachat shivtos. That God kind of passes us one by one and goes through. Are we what are we up to? So, what have we done? That's what the sheep would do. They would go under the shevet. Okay, the person, a shevet is a stick. The owner would have a staff. It would go under, and he would count 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and the 10th one that would come out would become maaser. That would be brought to the temple as a sacrifice. The important part that I didn't clarify last time was that it actually, until the time of these times of year, you were actually allowed to use them. It wasn't like fruits and vegetables. However, the rabbis said that once these times come, the rabbis designated these as times, whatever the times are, there's a machloket, which day. From that date, you're not allowed, by rabbinic law, you're not allowed to use your animals until you take the 10th one and separate it from the rest. Okay, so it becomes tevel at that point. Okay, but it's not before. That's an important distinction between the difference between the two. Okay, so now what were the dates they would do it? So 15 days before each holiday, or 2 weeks really. Behem granot shel maaser behema. Okay, actually 15 days, I should say, not 2 weeks. And these are the granot of maaser behema. It's the same time. Sorry, that's Divrei Rabbi Akiva. That's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. I said before Tanakh, it's Rabbi Akiva. Ben Azai Omer, be'esrim v'tisha ba'adar. It's the 29th of Adar. Now, the first issue between him and Rabbi Akiva is he says that it's always going to be the 29th of Adar because Adar is always chaser, and therefore it's always going to be 15 days. So he doesn't disagree about the 15 days. It's just that Rabbi Akiva thinks sometimes they made it a full month, sometimes it was missing, it was a chaser month, 29 days, sometimes 30 days. Therefore, he determined 15 days before, whatever that comes out. Ben Azai says, I'll give you an exact date because it's always going to be the same. So that's the debate number one. Echad Sivan, he says the first of Sivan. Why the first of Sivan and not 2 weeks before? This is only 6 days before the holiday. So some people say it's because he thinks it's not enough time between Pesach. There aren't that many animals born between Pesach and Shavuot that we should give it a little bit more time. And that's why we push it off till a few days before. Today we're going to learn why he thinks there's a whole month different, not just a day of, is it this date, the 29th, or is it the 1st? No, he thinks it's a whole month before, not Elul. You should have said the 29th of Elul. He says the 29th of Av, and we'll see in our Gemara why that is. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon Omrim, third opinion, he thinks it's exactly 2 weeks, not 15 days, not half a month, but 2 weeks before. So he does Echad b'Nisan. Echad b'Sivan, he agrees with Ben Azai that we shouldn't do it too much before Shavuot. And b'Kaftet be'Elul. Here he also says kaftet, but really it's not because of the month being whole or full or not full. It's because it says clearly in the Mishnah why kaftet be'Elul and not echad b'Tishrei, like he said echad b'Nisan. So why not? says because you just literally can't do it on the first of Nisan, because the first of Tishrei, because it's Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, do it a day before. Okay. To which we saw some things in the Gemara. I'm going to skip that part now, and we're going to start from the top of our daf. Taman Tanina. Now we're going to quote another Mishnah. Rabbi Meir Omer, Be'echad be'elul Rosh Hashanah l'maser behema. This is when we talk about what are the new years for different things. What determines the new year? Now, here we just said there are 3 times a year. That's one thing. That's in terms of when we do, and now we're moving on to maser behema, and not putting aside right now the whole Truma Lishka, which are the same dates. But now we're going to say it's true that we do it 3 times a year. But let me just explain what happens. We take our animals, we put them in, we pass them, right? The 10th one. What if I have 5 left over? So I put them with the next one. Okay, so let's say I did it in the beginning of Nisan, and then I go, and it's before Shavuot. I take those, let's say there were 5 left over. I take those 5 and I again do the same thing. But now, what if at a certain point, we're going to say these are considered this year's and those are considered next year's, and this year's can't go together with next year's. So if I have 5 left over and 5 new ones, I can't put them together. So what's the determining date for that, for which go together with which year animals? It's Echad Be'elul Rosh Hashanah L'Maser Behema. It's the first of Elul. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon Omrim, Be'echad B'Tishrei. We're going to see the same characters in our Mishnah. Shimon and Rabbi Lazar and Ben Azai. So he says, and it's going to explain why we have a machloket between the different opinions in the Mishnah. So they say it's Echad B'Tishrei, not Echad Be'elul. It's Echad B'Tishrei. Ben Azai Omer, Ha'elulim Mitaschlim B'fnei Atzmam. He basically is the compromise approach, who says, look, you think it's the first of Elul, and you think it's the first of Tishrei. So basically, you're disagreeing about what happens to the animals in the month of Elul. Okay, so what does he say? The Eluls are considered like a year by themselves, which means if you have leftover, in other words, you're going to do, he basically agrees with the first opinion, that Echad Be'elul is Rosh Hashanah, and therefore let's look in the Mishnah. What does Ben Azai say? You do it on the 29th of Av, right? That's when you do the counting. So you do it on the 29th of Av and you finish all the animals that are 100% part of last year's. Now the next month you have all the Eluls. So the next time you do the Goren, and we're going to see this more in depth later, they're going to explain this. What are you going to do? You're going to take the ones from Elul, you're going to put them all separate from the rest, put them through. And then when you're done with that, even if you have a few leftovers, they can't join with anybody else because they're suffix. We don't know. Do they belong to last year's or do they belong to the upcoming year? And then, so you're finished with those. You might have a few left over, nothing to do about that. That's fine. You can use them because they're not obligated in Maser because you get up to 10. And then do the Tishreis by themselves. So he thinks that month, because it's a doubt, we don't know what to do, is treated all on their own. Ama Rabbi Chuna, Tama de Rabbi Meir. So now we're going to see the Tanakama, which is Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says the first opinion, Echad Be'elul. So what's his reason? Now it's very nice. We said one's Echad Be'elul, one's Echad B'Tishrei. What's the difference between them? So now we're going to see what's his reason. Why does he say Echad Be'elul? Ad kan hem mitmatzot leleid min hayishanot. Until this day, okay, we're going to now. This is very relevant to today. Today is Tet Zayin B'Nisan. What's the significance of our date today? It's the day they brought the Omer sacrifice. What did the Omer sacrifice do? It permitted all the new crops. Why are they called new crops? Because they what was grown in this year's crops. Nisan is the date that determines. Likewise with animals. Even though we said it's either Chab Elul or Chab Tishrei, and you thought it had to do with the new year of Rosh Hashanah, no. It actually has to do with the new year from Nisan. When they got pregnant, it has to do with what day they got pregnant. The ones who were impregnated before Nisan, there's a 5-month gestation period for smaller animals, what they call behemotako, like sheep and lambs and all that. That's what we're obligated, maser behema, mavir tsono, tachachivto, the tson are the small animals. So ad kane mitmatzot lele minei yashanot. Until Echad Be'elul, you're going to have all the old animals that were impregnated before Nisan. Mikam va'elach, but after that, matchilot lele min chadashot, they're already from this year's, from Nisan. So therefore, that's the determining date. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Bum, B'Shem Rav Huna, Tamad Rabbi Lezav, Rabbi Shimon. So why did they say Echa B'Tishrei? That sounds like a good answer. Echa B'Elul. It's 5 months from Nisan. Lavshu. So they quote a verse which says, Lavshu Karim Hatzon. Okay, Karim is kind of like pillows. Some people say it's more flesh, like all of a sudden the animals have more. They wore something extra, meaning they got pregnant. Elu habikirot. That's referring to the ones who give birth early or on time. Okay, we all know this, that you can't exactly determine when someone's going to give birth, right? Some people give birth 2 weeks early, some people 2 weeks late, some people right on the right date, some people even a month early. Okay, there's all different dates. So also with animals, Lavshu karim atzon, this verse is referring to the ones who give birth on time. V'amkei ya'atfu bal. These are elu ha'afelot. That's a reference to the ones who give birth late, okay, which are going to be in the upcoming month. Now, what does the verse say at the end? Yitra'u af yashiru. They will go together. They'll even sing together. Okay. What do they learn from this? Elu ve'elu nichnesim ladir litaser. What they basically say is, we're going to give it 1 extra month because there are some that are going to give birth late. And according to this verse, it's a reference to the fact that all of these go together, which means where would they go together? Oh, presumably in the pen in order to take the Maser Be'emah. It's obviously not the simple reading of that verse, but it's a drasha on that verse. And therefore they say we're going to give it an extra month because some of them that are born in Elul are still from the previous year. So now, haketzad. So how does this work? Nolalo b'chamisha b'av, v'chamisha b'Elul, v'chamisha b'Tishrei, ein mitzrafim, right? If they're born on the 5th of Av, on the 5th of Elul, on the 5th of Tishrei, they don't join together. Okay? So, nolalo b'echad, b'chamisha b'Tishrei, v'chamisha b'Av, harei Elu mitzrafim, right? But if it was born on the 5th of Tishrei, and then later on that year, on the 5th of Av, they will join together. Okay, so in other words, again, it's all a matter of where you put the cutoff. This is what I explained before. If the cutoff is in Av, then whatever before Av won't join with whatever's after Av, right? Or all depends where you put the cutoff. The Ben Azai, okay, so now we have a problem with Ben Azai, okay? So Ben Azai says, sorry, did I skip a line? I think I skipped a line. Sorry about that. Amar Ben Azai, sorry, I should have, let me go back. That was all Ben Azai that we were explaining. Sorry, I forgot to quote this line, I missed it. So let's go back. Ben Azai says, since they say this and they say that, right? One says Av and one says Elul, and one says, sorry, the 1st of Elul, which means ends in Av. And the other says the 1st of Tishrei, which ends, or the end of Elul. So since that's the case, and they say this and they say that, the Elul one should be separate. And that's why he gives this example, haketzad. If, so now, how does Elul get treated by itself? And this I explained before. If you have one's born on the 5th of Av and the 5th of Elul and the 5th of Tishrei, each of those 3 is considered totally separate. The 5th of Av can't go with the 5th of Elul because the Eluls are by themselves, because maybe it's a new year. And the 5th of Elul can't go with the 5th of Tishrei because maybe that's a new year in a Chab Tishrei. So therefore, they're stuck at the only time they go together is if it was on the 5th of Tishrei, and then all the way through that year until the 5th of Av, that will also be together if it's the Av after Tishrei, but not the Av before Tishrei. Okay, that's pretty clear. Now we're going to talk about, today's daf does a lot of zooming out, okay, and going into something a little bit different, totally different topic, which is how does a student speak to one's rabbi? With a certain amount of respect, right? We speak to our elders, we speak to, right? This is something that we struggle with a little bit in our generation. People don't exactly have respect for leaders anymore, and therefore don't really speak with leaders with the proper respect. But, right, some people do. It depends on the scenario. It depends who the leader is, it depends who the rabbi is, it depends who the person is, right? There's in different communities, there's different customs. But here the Gemara basically says, first we're going to start with Ben Azai Machriya Tivrei Talmidav. First of all, what's the purpose of a rabbi? When he hears his students, now Ben Azai was a teacher of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Lezav and Rabbi Shimon. So how could it be that he's supposed to determine the law when he hears the students, and some say this and some say that? What's this that he said, oh, well, you say this and you say that, I'll do some middle something. Doesn't make sense. A rabbi is supposed to say, I hear what you say. I hear what you say. I'm determining what we should do. So what do they say? Ata Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Yasha b'Shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak sheken nechleku alei avot ha'olam. It's true that our Mishnah mentioned this is Machlok of Rabbi Meir versus Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon, but really, it was a machloket before their time. And Ben Azai isn't determining, oh, well, I don't know how to decide between my students. No, he was going back a previous generation and saying, this was something the previous generation debated, and I don't know how to decide because it was the previous generation. And therefore, out of respect for my rabbis, I'm going to do this compromised position. Now, my Ninhu Avot HaOlam, who are these fathers of the world that we're referring to? Tana Rabbi Yonah, Kamei Rabbi Yirmiyah. Okay, Rabbi Yonah is a fourth generation Emora in Eretz Israel who appears a lot in the Yerushalmi, not very frequently in the Bavli, right? There's people like Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Rish Lakish who are always mentioned in the Bavli. Rabbi Elazar, he was mentioned less so. He comes in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah we see a lot in the Bavli. He says, Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Okay, it was a debate between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, and he determined, right? And that's why he said, we're going to do a compromise. Okay, I don't know who to decide. However, they point out, well, it's true. He had this level of respect of his rabbis and didn't want to determine who am I judging, like Rabbi Shmuel or Rabbi Akiva. However, there's something in the language that they point out right now. And they start talking about how does he speak to Rabbi Akiva? It's very, or both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. But they say, Zot omeret, Ben Azai chaver v'talmid haya Rabbi Akiva, de Rabbi Akiva. Ben Azai, we know he was a student of Rabbi Akiva, but he must have been not just a student, but a student who achieved the status of colleague. This is a status that we've talked about in the Gemara a lot, which is you could be a talmid and a chaver. It's where you're a student, but you rise to the level where you almost achieve being at the same level as the rabbi, okay, which we all know happens, right? We all have, you're a teacher, you know you have students, and eventually they grow up and they become, sometimes they're smarter than you and they know more than you and they're more knowledgeable, or they're equally, and they become at your level. So that must be the relationship between Ben Azai and Rabbi Akiva. How do we know this? Because in Tema Rabbi, in usually is like im, if. If you say he was his rabbi, it barnash amar leRabbi, ho'il ve'elu omrim kach ve'elu omrim kach. He wouldn't say, because some say this and some say that. You don't speak to your rabbi as some say. That's not a respectful way to speak to your rabbi. Must have been he achieved the status of a Talmid Chaver. And now Rabbi Avin b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak shamalei min hada. He's going to infer the same thing from a different situation, where also Ben Azai spoke to Rabbi Akiva in a particular way that wasn't respectful of a student and a rabbi. Amar le Ben Azai, ala chalukim anu mitzta'arim, ela shabat lachalok aleinu et hashavim. Zot omeret, Ben Azai chaver v'talmid haya Rabbi Akiva. Because again, Eden Tamer Rabbi, Eat Barnash Amar Rabbi, El Shabbat Lachlok Aleinu Et Hashavim. Okay, let me explain now, but it's basically the same idea. We're going to say he would never have used this language if Rabbi Akiva was his rabbi only. So what was the case? The case is that there's these machlokot Beit Shammai Beit Hillel, and there's three topics, and they argue about two, but they agree about the third. So it comes, and this is a very interesting thing. We're so used to machloket that we don't take it as a big deal, right? We know there's debates all the time, and this one says that, this one says that. But in an earlier time period, it wasn't viewed as so acceptable to have debates, and they didn't want to have debates because debates just create confusion, right? It's the same thing we feel like, oh, it's so confusing. How do I know what I'm supposed to do if there's this opinion, there's that opinion? So we've just gotten used to it. But in their day, where it wasn't so common, so there was this machloket, and came Rabbi Akiva, and he said, listen, I actually think that they also have a debate regarding the third machlok, the third topic. So comes Ben Azai, and he says to him, we're so upset about the fact that they argue about these two cases. And now, at least we thought they agreed on one. And now you're going to take away also that one from us, right? It's this sad, can't believe you're going to make another machloket. Like, you're breaking apart the Jewish people, right? So he says, here you can infer, again, the Ben Azai must have been a Talmid Chaver, because you wouldn't say to your rabbi, now you're coming to split up the ones who were equal, and then you're coming to split up a case where we thought they all agreed. You wouldn't speak in that language to someone who is your superior, basically. So because of that, right now, of course, what am I thinking of? The army. This whole discussion in my house a few weeks ago about, how you have to address your army, someone who's superior to you, with the words Haksheva Mefaked. You can't speak ever without saying, listen, commander. You can't ever open your mouth and say anything to someone superior without saying those words. And we're having a discussion about whether that's a good thing or not. And, and my son was in the army, was saying you have to do that, because if you don't have that, right, the whole thing about the army is to explain that there's a chain of command, and you always have to listen to someone who's more superior. So anyway, there was a whole debate about it in my house, but you could see this idea about in certain societies, you can only you can only speak in such a way to anyone who's superior than you. Also with the rabbis, it was the same way. So it must be that they were on the same level. Otherwise, there's no way he would have addressed him in this manner. Now we're going back to our topic. We had a nice little diversion. We're going to have a lot of these today. Taman Tanina, another Mishnah. Kol hanoladim me'achad b'tishrei ad kafteh be'elul, harei elu mitztarfim. Okay, so now again, we're going to say anyone born from any animals born from the 1st of Tishrei until the 29th of Elul, they all join together. This is according to the main opinion, not Ben Azai, right? That Rosh Hashanah is on the 1st of Tishrei, not Rabbi Meir either. This is Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon. Chamisha lifnei Rosh Hashanah, v'chamisha la'achar Rosh Hashanah. This is just basic. If 5 were born before and 5 were born after, ein mitzdarfim. So again, what does it mean they don't join? It means that when I do my next goren, right, which is the time I'm going to put them all in the pen, and I'm going to say, they call it the goren, but anyway, when I put them all in the pen, I'm not going to put the 5 that were left over from last time because they were from last year's. So I can't put them together with these. But but that's only true for this Rosh Hashanah date. But when I'm standing on whatever day in 2 weeks before, let's say Sukkot, okay, whether it's exactly 2 weeks or Kafteh Elul, and there I'm taking, actually that's not the good one. Let's do Kafteh the 2 weeks before Pesach. Standing 2 weeks before Pesach, and I have animals that were born before this date, and those dates are not relevant for joining animals. Those dates are just dates throughout the year that I'm supposed to do it. But the only date that determines who can be together with who and who can't be together with who is the one on Echad B'Tishrei. All the other dates of the other times we do this during the year are not determining who can go with who. Those dates are just determining what's the day that we have to put them all in the pen and start counting. But we can combine animals from before to Nisan, after Nisan, before Sivan, after Sivan. That doesn't matter. All those animals can go together. It's just that those were dates that they said we're supposed to do the Maaser Behema on those dates. So now they're going to say, Amar Rabbi Yosef, Hadar Omeret, Maaser Behema lo asuota lo kechenet velo keshlish. He makes this statement now, which some are going to disagree with, which is when it comes to fruits, there's different things that determine different halachot when it comes to fruits growing. There's when it buds, that's the chenet, right? We all know first it comes, there's a flower, right? It buds, then from there goes the flower, then the fruit starts to grow. So there's an issue of chenet for certain things, and there's an issue of shlish. Then we get to once it already grew a third of the way, where already it becomes what we call ra'oi la'achila, could be potentially edible, even though most people don't eat it when it's only a third of the way, but it's already potentially, right? It's like we saw this with Mahab and Drosai with cooked food on Shabbos also. A third of the way cooked is already enough to be considered cooked. So those things are not relevant when it comes to the animals. Why? Because what determines with the animals? Birth. Birth is not like Hanatah, and it's not like Shlish. Why not? Well, we'll see inside. Im Temar Kechenet, if we think that it's when it buds, what would the relevant date be? It should be when they got impregnated. That would be the parallel to budding of a fruit. If you want to say a third, if you want to say it's the shlish, what's shlish when it comes to animals? It means when it comes to food, it's able to be eaten. When it comes to animals, what are we trying to do here? Take the animal tithes. What do we do with them? We bring them and sacrifice them in the temple. We're supposed to, right? What are we supposed to do with them? We bring the tenth to Jerusalem, we sacrifice it, and we eat it in Jerusalem. It's kind of like Maaser Sheni produce that we bring. Now, if you say Ra'oi la'achila, right? The what's called the shlish, the third is when it comes to fruits and vegetables, it's edible. What will it be by Maaser Behema? Able to be sacrificed. When can an animal be sacrificed? Only on the 8th day of its life. You can't sacrifice an animal until it's 8 days old. So if it were all about the shlish and ra'oi le'achila, which would be here, ra'oi la'krava, valid to be sacrificed on the altar, then it would be the 22nd of Elul, because then they'll be, right, by the time we do it, on the 1st of Tishrei, they'll be 8 days old. But we don't say the 22nd of Elul, we say the 29th. So clearly the issue of shlish is not a relevant factor here. To which Rabbi Shammai disagrees with him and says, no, Rabbi Shammai b'shem Rabbi Vivi Rabbi Chia says, Kishlish asuota, Rabbi Shimon d'amar Rabbi Shimon, mechusar zman nichnas l'dir litaser. Rabbi Shimon has an opinion that even if, and as the rabbis obviously think, in order to go into the pen, they have to be ra'oi lahakravat. They have to be able to go on the altar. You can only put them in the pen and start counting them when they're 8 days old. Rabbi Shimon thinks you can put them in the pen right away and start counting them. It's true, you'll have to wait 8 days till you can sacrifice them on the altar, but you can already put in the pen and determine this one's going to be for Maaser and just wait the 8 days. He thinks you can. So what does he say basically? Rabbi Shammai. Rabbi Shammai says that you can basically, that's shlish. Shlish, you said, able to be edible, right? When it comes to foods, able to be eaten, that shlish is equivalent to able to go into the pen to be tithed, which according to Rabbi Shimon, he says, I can explain it's like shlish, where it's basically the fact that it can go into the pen is something that happens at birth, and birth is like shlish. That's what he basically says. So I disagree with you that there's no such thing as shlish when it comes to Maaser Behema, because according to Rabbi Shimon, this is shlish. To which Rabbi Mana disagrees. Kam Rabbi Mana im Rabbi Shammai, that means he got up to debate him, and he says, Amarle, Atamart Chad Milta, did you really say that? But then Taman Taninan ben Azai Omer Elulim et Aslin Latzman. Lo afilu nolad ad 29 be'elul. You want to say that this idea of the 29th is because it's Rabbi Shimon's opinion. And therefore, anyone who says the 29th is Rabbi Shimon and not the rabbis. So he says, are you going to say that Rabbi Shimon, when he says that Elulim et Aslim b'fnei atzman, and obviously he means anyone born in the whole month of Elul and not just till the 22nd, he's going to be only according to Rabbi Shimon, and right? And he says this doesn't make any sense. So now he basically explains things a little bit differently. He says, Ilach Meimar, I can explain Ben Azai. So he says, Ilach Meimar Ben Azai Rabbi Shimon v'lo Rabbanit. Are you saying Ben Azai says like Rabbi Shimon and not like the rabbis? So now he says, you're trying to prove that the fact that they didn't say the 22nd shows that this all holds like Rabbi Shimon, that anyone can go in, right? Even you can be in the part of the pen anyway, and that's like a shlish. But then you have to say everyone holds like Rabbi Shimon. He says, how could it be Ben Azai only held like Rabbi Shimon? It doesn't make any sense. So now he says, how can you explain according to the rabbis? In other words, the rabbis who think that you can't go in the pen unless, we now have to reconcile this fact. You can't go in the pen unless you're 8 days old, which really means that the dates should have all been kaf bet and not kaf tet, right? Not the end of the month, but 8 days before. So now Rabbi Mana is going to explain it his way. Okay, we're going to have this in-between concept. Okay, so let's see. The same way I'll explain the rabbis in this way. I'm going to explain it in a second. Let me just finish the line. He's basically going to say, I'm going to show you that Ben Azai holds like the way I understand it, the way the rabbis understand it. And here's the difference between Ben Azai and the rabbis, but really they all agree in principle about the same idea, which is what? According to what we said, the rabbis disagree and think, right? The rabbis and Rabbi Shimon disagree about, okay, we're talking about different rabbis here. There's rabbis and Rabbi Shimon who disagree about, can the animals go in the pen and be counted if they can't go on the altar? Rabbi Shimon says yes, the rabbis say no. So according to the rabbis who say they can't, these whole dates are very strange. How do you explain the dates of Rabbi Meir, which is the rabbis here that they're referring to, that it's at the end, right? At the end of the Echad Be'elul is the date, and Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar who say Echad B'Tishrei, and Ben Azai who say the Elulim are B'fnei Atzman. Nobody said 22nd. So he says, how do I explain it? There's actually something a little bit more complicated than we thought. You take all the animals from the year and you put them in the pen. Okay, they can all go in the pen, but they can't all go in the pen. Sorry, according to the rabbis, right? Only the ones who are 8 days old. So what do? But however, Echad Be'elul or Echad B'Tishrei is the date for Maaser Behema. So what does that mean? What he says you do is you take all the animals that were born in this year, including the ones that can't be sacrificed. You put them all together. Then you separate out the ones that can't yet go on the altar, that were born in the last few days. Take them out, put them in a separate area. All the animals that were born before that go through, you take Maaser Behema. Now, let's say you have 5 left over. What do you do with those 5? And let's say you have 5 that were born since then, those last 8 days, or 7 days. What do you do with them? Next time, it's the next date. Okay, let's say this was Echad B'Tishrei. So now you get to Echad B'Nisan. On Echad B'Nisan, those animals, okay, let me read this inside again now that we're up to this. So we read here, he says, I'm just going back. You push them off till the next time that you're supposed to do the goren. You put those together with the other animals that were from that year. So whatever was left over from that year that didn't have, you didn't get up to 10, add them with these that were not yet 8 days old. They all go together. Let's say you only have 8, you don't take an animal. If you have 10, great, you take an animal. Then you're done with them. You can't put them together with the next year's crop. The next year's animals then all get meiser then, separately. So it's this in between. They're still connected. And now we're going to say that Ben Azai will say the same thing about the Elus. So let's say you now are on the 1st of Tishrei. So the ones that were born in Elul, remember he says you do your own separate maser for them. They can't go with the previous year and they can't go with the next year. But now we're going to say that from the 23rd to the end of Elul, they even have to go by themselves. They can't be done the next time you do it. You have to push them off till the upcoming time because they're not yet Ra'oi L'Akrava Echad B'Tishrei. You push them off till the next time. And then, but again, they can only go with the animals of their year. So if you don't have 10 of them that were born, there's nothing you could do with them. Or again, left over from Elul. So they go together with anyone that was born in Elul that was left over, that wasn't part of the count last time. And then you mix them with these new ones, but only at the next time, not this time, only Echad B'Nisan. Okay, so that's how he explains what you do. And he doesn't agree with Rabbi Shammai that he says this is all only according to Rabbi Shimon. Okay, next. Amar Rabbi Chia, Zot Omeret. By the way, we can learn from here something else. A different law about Bechor. What's Bechor? By the way, all of this, Maser Behema and Bechor, all these are in Masechet Bechorot, okay, which we're going to get to much, much later in the cycle. Bechor is an animal that the firstborn animal has to go to the Kohen. So now, the animal has to be sacrificed by the Kohen in the temple within its first year. So now we're going to say, well, when do we count its first year? Does it count from day number 8, when it can go on the altar, or does it count from when the animal is born? So what can we derive from here? That it all goes based on the day the animal is born and not based on when it's valid to be sacrificed. So that's basically what they're going to say here. Because again, we count the animal within the year that it's born, even though it can't be sacrificed yet. So he says, we can learn from here, Yamim Shabachor Mechusar Zman Behem Olin Lo Letoch Shnato. Even though you can't yet bring him as a sacrifice the first 7 days of his life, still they count to be considered. He's a year old. So if a year passes from the date the animal was born, it's a problem. And now we're going to prove that from a verse. Amar Rabbi Mana, Amar Rabbi Yona, Abba Shama Lamin Hada. My father learned it from this pursuit. Call the Bechor Asher Yivaled. Any firstborn that is born. What do you see here? Born is the determining factor. Hazachar Takdish, the first male will be sanctified. Ha Ketzad, how do you learn that? Right from when? Mishnat Ledato At Monalo Shana. You do it from the date of birth. Okay, new halacha. Halacha bet. This stuff is a little bit more simple. And funny and interesting coincidence, we're going to get to Seder night here, okay? We're going to get to Arba Kosot of the Seder, which is kind of nice. It would have been nicer had we had this 2 days ago before, but it's very nice that it coincides. B'shalosh kupot shalosh se'im, tormim et halishka. So now, what would you do when you do Trumat halishka? You take all the money collected and you start putting it into these baskets. You put it in 3 baskets. Each basket holds 3 se'ah. That was the measurement or weight. Okay, 3 se'ah. B'katuv alehan aleph bet gimel, and you number them. Aleph bet gimel. Okay, first 3 letters of the alphabet. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, you might find this interesting. Yevanit katuv alehan. We spoke Greek in those days, so he says we write it in Greek. It was like saying now we put it in English. Okay, ABC. Okay, kind of strange. So alpha, beta, gamma. Okay, you put the Greek letters, not the Hebrew letters. By the way, we don't hold like him, which makes sense, right? That we put the Hebrew letters, but it's interesting that he says that. Ein hatorem nichnas. Now we have a great halacha. The person who goes to do the Trumat halishka can't go into the temple like this. Lo bepargod chafut, not with a folded cloak. Okay, some people say it's folded by the bosom. Some people say it means like sleeves that fold over. Okay, what's the concern? We're worried if you have folds, you might put money, right? It's very easy for them to take money. There's no inventory here of how much was collected. And therefore, there's a concern. People will suspect the person. It's not even forget about them taking. People might suspect the person that they stole. So you have to go in with a plain cloak without any sort of seams or anywhere where you could hide things. The lo b'min al, not with shoes, because, right, this reminds us of the airport. Not that we've been to the airport in a long time, but the airport, you have to check your shoes, right? Because people can hide things in their shoes. The lo b'sandal, also sandals. The lo b'tfilin, the lo b'kamea. Tefillin have boxes. You could hide it in the tefillin. The kameot, the amulets, had apparently pouches, right? Sometimes they put pouches with things in that side. So you could hide money in there. Shema ya'ani v'yomru me'avona lishka ha'eni. One possibility is you might become poor, and people will say, hey, look, he must have stolen, and that's why he became poor. God is punishing him. Oh, Shema Shiur, or maybe he'll become wealthy. This we all know. And people will say he must have stolen, right? This is classic. We had the story in the news recently in Israel, right? The head of an amutah was stealing money and filtering it, money laundering and taking it for his own purpose, right? See this person who runs an amutah and they're running around with, all sorts of wealth that you wonder, where did they get it from? People begin to suspect, and often, not always true, but sometimes it's true. So here we get to a very famous line. You have to make yourself look in the eyes of others the same way you want yourself to look in the eyes of God. In other words, don't arouse any sort of suspicion. Shenamar, where do we get this from? Interesting, they bring two verses. You wonder why they need two, and we'll talk a bit about the differences between the two. Obviously, there's a lot more you can think about this. You should be clean from God and from the Jewish people. In other words, make sure that you're clean across the board, that no one's going to suspect you of any wrongdoing. It also says you want to find favor in the eyes of God and man. Two differences here I'll just point out for the start. One is Yisrael and one is people, right? Adam, just anybody, not just Jewish people. And the second is Nikiyim, means don't arouse suspicion. Matzachem v'sechel tov, right, is something you want to find favor. That's farther than, it's even more than, not just don't have people suspect you, but you want to be someone who people like and people want to be with. Anyway, these are nice thoughts to have and nice ideas. Obviously, some people could say, you could have the other attitude, like, I know what I'm doing is right and I don't have to try to prove it to anybody, right? So there's a balance to be struck between those things. Taman Tanina. So now we're going to quote, the Gemara is going to start off on a totally different topic, which is a Mishnah we learned in Masechet Shabbat, which is afilu arba v'chamesh kupot. If you remember, mifanin, afilu arba v'chamesh kupot. If you remember, it's actually called Perik Mifanin. It started with this Mishnah. If you need the space for guests or for learning, for a Beit Midrash, you're allowed on Shabbat to move baskets of whatever it is in your storage house. Now, even though this is what we call a tirchi atera, it's hard work, we allow it on Shabbat for those reasons. So now they want to know, how heavy are these, right? Think about it. You could be carrying, really heavy baskets. You could have baskets with ammunition in them. It's really heavy. You could have baskets with flour in them. That's not so, you could have all sorts of baskets. So what is the weight that are in these baskets that we allow? So Amarle, Nilmad Satum in a This is a method of learning something. If we have something that we don't know, and we have a different place where it did specify, let's learn from the specified place to the not specified place. Where do we have it specified? Ditanya, now theoretically, and it's a big question, why? They could have just quoted our Mishnah. And they're going to basically say, the kupot in our Mishnah were 3 se'ah. Therefore, we're going to see that must be also 3 se'ah. Okay? And that's the measure. For some reason, they quote a Braita, maybe because they wanted to teach us more things about our Mishnah, and they just did it in this method. But this Braita has other information that's not really necessary, and the Mishnah would have been enough. But in any case, they quote the Braita, and I have a good answer for why, but maybe just because they want to teach us some other things, which is very classic of the Gemara. Titanya, as it says in the following Braita, B'shalosh kupot shalosh se'im. Now they're going to do some very simple math. Shehein tisha se'im. Okay, so if you have 3 baskets with 3 se'ah each, 3 times 3 is 9. Shehein, now you do this 3 times a year. So if you have 9 se'im 3 times a year, how much are you going to get to? Shehein esrim b'sheva se'im. So like I said, we already have our answer, which is in each kupah with 3 se'ah, and that's our answer to the question. Therefore, on Shabbat, we must be talking about baskets with 3 se'ah of items in them. Now they're going to say, so it's 3 v'sheva se'in altogether throughout the entire year, you'd end up with 27 se'ah of coins. Tormim et hadishkan, that's what you would do. V'katuv alayan aleph bet gimel. Now, We didn't explain this in the Mishnah, right? Why do you need to number them? There was a whole method to how they did it. First, you had to, so you put it into these 3 equal baskets. Then you started from the first and you started paying out the money for all the sacrifices and everything you need. When you finish the first, you move to the second. When you finish the second, you move to the third. There's a special order. That's why they had to be ordered. Otherwise, you wouldn't remember which was the first, which was the second, which was the third. That was our first topic. Now, since we already mentioned this concept of Nilmad Satum Min HaMefurash, sometimes it doesn't express the quantity, and another place it does. And we're going to learn it one from the other. So they bring up another question about it, totally unrelated. Taman Tanin, and it says there, Hamotzi Yayin Kedei Mizigat HaKos. When you carry on Shabbat, we learned this in Masechet Shabbat. If I carry out a drop of wine, I'm not obligated for carrying out from a private domain to a public domain because it's totally insignificant. But if it's a significant amount of wine, then I'm obligated. So what is that significant amount of wine? So they say it's kedei mizigat hakos. It's the amount of wine that you would dilute with water to make a cup of wine. Remember, we've talked about this. We talked about it when we talked about the 4 cups. So now Rabbi Zera Shalat Rabbi Yoshaya, Kama Shiuran Shel Kos. It says a cup. What does a cup mean, right? We all know there's cups this size, there's cups that size, right? There's cups all sizes. How would we know? So again, Amalei Nomad Satum Min HaMefurash. We're going to learn something that's said explicitly from somewhere. Sorry, we're going to learn something where it doesn't express it from somewhere where it says said explicitly. Ditani Rabbi Chia, Arba Kosot Sha'amru, Yeshnan Revi'it Shel Yayin Be'italki. The 4 cups of wine on Pesach are a revi'it, a log of the Italian wine. Okay, it's a log. A log was a revi'it of a log, a quarter of a log. That's the measurement. So it's in order to make a cup, that's a quarter of a log. We know, we learned this before, that a revi'it is the shiur, the measurement of a cup of wine. So Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Avi Mishum Rabbi Yochanan de Rabbi Yehuda. This, by the way, is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. How do we know this? Ditane, as it says, Mayim, how much water are you obligated for? Kedei gemia, just a swallowful. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, now, by the way, we're on a different topic. We're going to get to wine in a second, but they just quoted the whole source. Now they're talking about water. Rabbi Yehuda says even less water is significant. There was an eye salve that they put on their eyes when they had some problem. The amount of water you had to mix with it, that already is a significant amount because it can be used for something important. When it comes to yayin, kedei gemia, again, Tanakama says a swallow, and Rabbi Yehuda Omer, kedei mizigat hakos. So we're basically saying this whole thing we talked about, kedei mizigat hakos, is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Mazug bekama, how much? Nishmin and minhada, let's learn from here. Mayim kedei gemia, Rabbi Yehuda Omer kedei lashupa and takilor. Again, the same thing. Yayin kedei gemia, Rabbi Yehuda Omer kedei mizigat hakos. And then on this it was said, Hada Amra, Mazug kedei mizigat hakos, kama shiuran shel. So now they say it's in order to dilute a cup. Kama shiuran shel kos, how much is a cup? Rabbi Avin Amar, titron viruvia. This is obviously putting it into their terminology. They didn't know from logs, just like we don't know from logs. They used a different measurement. That measurement is equivalent to a quarter of a log. Now we get to a question we asked in Pesachim. Can you drink all 4 cups at once? Remember what we said? You're only yotzei part, but you're not yotzei everything. Remember, you're not yotzei 4 kosot, but you're yotzei yayin. So here it says, Mida Amar Rabbi Mana, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Halel im shma'am bebeit hakneset yatsa. It's good I didn't tell you this before Pesach, because it says here, if you heard Halel in shul, yatsa, and you don't have to say it at the Seder. So if you were tired at Seder and you didn't want to say this, you already said Halel in shul, you don't have to say it again at the Seder. Right? Good, you didn't know this because obviously better to say it at the Seder. But according to this, and we don't hold this way, but according to this opinion, if you did, you'd be yotzei. Therefore, hadamra im shatam b'kerach chad yatsa. Right? Well, then it's obvious. Then, if you skip halal on the seder, what do? You drink your 3rd cup, and then you drink your 4th cup right away because the 3rd and 4th cup are split with halal. So according to him, it must be you could drink 3 and 4 right next to each other. So obviously, you could drink them together. He doesn't think it's a problem. This, by the way, we saw in the Bavli. It is a problem, right? We don't do this. But anyway, that's interesting. It's a good example of where the Yerushalmi says something different than the Bavli. Right? When that happens, we almost always paskin like the Bavli. Shouldn't say always. Can you drink them a little bit at a time? This is also, we're going to see a lot of interesting things about wine that we didn't see, about the 4 cups that we didn't see in the Bavli. Is it the point of drinking to drink the wine, but not to get drunk? Okay, for those of you who get drunk over 4 cups of wine, right? This is very clear. You're not supposed to. Obviously, you can't always control that. So therefore, if you drink slowly, it's less likely you're going to get drunk. And therefore, of course, you could drink these cups slowly. Let's say can you use yain, the Shemitah wine that has sanctity to it? Yes, you can. Let's say konditun can use a sweet wine. Miditane bar kapara. Konditun ki yain. V'hadar amra yotzim beyain kondutin. Yes, you can. Treat it like wine. Now, we're going to have a whole question about all different kinds of wines. And the idea is going to be that the assumption is these are wines that can't be poured as libations on the altar. The question is, can they be used for the 4 cups on Pesach? And some people say the question is for Kiddush in general. Can these be used? So they're basically going to end up saying, yes, you can use all these wines, even though they couldn't go on the altar. Can you use diluted wine? Now, this is a strange question. Don't we always use diluted wine? And the Bavli, the whole question was, can you have it not diluted? Is that okay? But it could be that they're asking very diluted, like people who want to have wine at the Seder, don't want to have too much wine, they dilute it with grape juice or something, right? So, and here we're going to get to grape juice. How do we allow grape juice? So, let's say we actually quoted this right in the Bavli. You can use whether they're undiluted, whether they're diluted, as long as they have the taste and the look of wine. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, mitzvah, let's say yayin adom. You have to use red wine, or it's a mitzvah to use red wine. Shneimar al teri yayin ki et adam ki item, because I know we quoted this first in the Bavli. Also has to be right. This is wine that actually, it's kind of funny because this is wine that causes destructive acts. Right, the real thing is the red wine. That's obviously the one we need to use, even though we just said you're not really supposed to get drunk from it. Tane mivushal. And this is where we get grape juice from, really, which is yayin mevushal. Again, is a weaker wine. It's a wine they didn't use on the altar. And it's like grape juice is also considered wine, okay? But you don't, right? Definitely to go on the altar. So what about mevushal? Kimitubal. You can, it's like spiced wine. Mao, let's say yayin mevushal. Can you use it? Amar Rabbi Yonah yotzim yayin mevushal. And you're going to see what Rabbi Yonah said you could do this. Rabbi Yonah l'tameh, Rabbi Yonah kad have a shate arba kasei pischa. When he would drink 4 cups of wine, have a chazik reisha ad chaga. He would get a headache till Shavuot. Okay, it would affect him very negatively. The Shulchan Aruch and others, the Rashba, paskins from here, and it's quoted in the Shulchan Aruch. This shows even if it's hard for you to drink 4 cups of wine, you have to drink it. Okay, maybe you can drink yain mavusha, you could drink grape, you could find something else. Okay, and that's where we get to these other options. But you have to drink it. You can't say, oh, I can't drink 4 cups. It's too much for me. Matronita, a Roman wealthy woman, came before him. Some people say it's Rabbi Yonah. Some people say there was another story in between here that got left out. That's in some of the versions about Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eli, and it was him that she asked. Amra, Saba, Saba, you have one of 3 things I see from your face. Either you're drunk, or you've lent money for interest, or you grow pigs. Now, all of you, right? All of these things are problematic halachically. Amarle, so he says to her, right? She should be some negative curse about her. Because none of these 3 things are true for me. Why do I look the way I look? And I look drunk because I'm drunk on Torah. Okay. I figured out something, I understood something that it was hard for me to understand. It's the wisdom of someone that makes his face glow. Rabbi Avav, same story. He got to Tveria. The students of Rabbi Yochanan saw his face was all lit up. Did he have some sort of, I'm trying to remember what Sima is. What the word Sima is, if someone wants to help me out here. But he saw, right, sorry, I forgot what they said. Right, did he find a treasure? Okay, did he find some sort of treasure? So he said, no, Amrle. So what does Rabbi Yochanan? He knew right away. What great Torah did you learn? He knew right away. It must have been that. Amarle Tosefta Atika. I found some ancient Tosefta. Kara alei chachmat adam te'ir panav. Same thing. Last thing for today. Amar Rabbi Chanin loga deoraita tzmunta atika demoraisa detzipori. That now we're just talking about how you, again, they're talking about measurements. So they want to know this log. How do we measure it in our day? Okay, which is their day. So he says it's this something called the Tmunata Atika, that they would measure the fish brine in Sipori. Amar Rav Yonah v'chakman alei debate Rabbi Yana have a mechilim bedvash. I saw it in the house of Rabbi Yana. They used it for measuring honey. And Tane, another Braita, and this is about a revi, the quarter of a log, chatzi shminit tevernit hayishana. They use this thing called a shminit. It was a half of a shminit. Is this revi'it halog? That's in Tiberia. What they use, they call a chatzi shminit. That measures a half revi'it of wine or whatever revi'it you want to measure. Okay, with that, we'll finish for today. We saw a lot of interesting things. We saw some technical things, and then we got off into other things like how you address your rabbi, how you learn things that are not clear, right? That we find another example where something's mentioned and we learn it from there. This whole idea about Torah lights up your face and makes you look like you're drunk. The whole thing about 4 cups not being meant to get you drunk, right? And what can you use in place of, if you need to substitute something instead, all sorts of interesting things. And the main really interesting about was the suspicion of people who would be Torah Melishka and how careful they have to be not to arouse any sort of suspicion of them taking money, which is something we very much relate to in our day with all the things that are going on. So have a Moadim L'Simcha, and we will continue tomorrow.